Hello Internet, and welcome back to yet another time-lapse tutorial. Today we're talking about the holy grail of time-lapses and how to shoot and edit it using LRTimelapse, a very popular time-lapse software. What you can see here now is a flickering sequence straight out of camera unedited, and what we'll be getting at the end of this tutorial is the following. There we go. So this is the edited series of raw photos that we'll be shooting. I'll be talking you through how to shoot it, how to put it on your computer, and how to edit it and export it. It's all pretty straightforward if you just follow along this video. If you don't like following along video tutorials, I have also written a blog post where you can follow it on your own pace, step by step. Would you look at that, a zoom transition? I have never seen that before. Here we go, that's me right there. My name is Matthew van de Putte, or Van de Putte. I'm from Belgium. Ik ben van Antwerpen. I'm a time-lapse photographer living in Sydney, Australia, and this channel is all about, you guessed it, time-lapse, travel, and teaching. And today I'll be teaching using a Canon 60 Mark II with a little tabletop tripod. I'm using a 16-35 f4 lens, and here you can see me setting up the shot. I'm looking for a nice frame, making sure that none of the buildings are too warped. I'm making sure that everything is nice and focused. Grabbing my very overpriced time-lapse remote. I've got gear options on the blog, by the way. Plugging it into the camera's remote port, making sure the camera's on manual, turning off the image stabilizer, and switching the lens to manual focus. Make sure that all your settings, that is shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, are on fully manual, so we are in control of the image and the exposure and not the camera. Don't forget to turn your white balance on a fixed setting as well. I'm going with shade here. Set up the interval on your remote for sunset. I usually go between 6 to 12-ish seconds. I've opted for a 6-second interval here because I was quite late and the sun was already kind of setting, meaning the light was already changing. Once you've double-checked all your settings and you've made sure that everything is nice and correct, you're going to start your sequence. I don't have image review on because it wastes battery life, and that's just how I shoot. So instead of the photo popping up automatically after every photo, I choose to stop the remote, hit play, review the image, and then press start again. I try to time this as accurately as possible to hit that 6-second interval so I don't get any irregularities in playback. As you notice, the exposure will keep going down, and in between photos you will adjust your exposure by 1/3 of a stop. I prefer to adjust my shutter speed first, afterwards I'll be adjusting the ISO. When do you start adjusting the ISO? Well, I have this basic rule: let the shutter speed run up till half the interval, which is the basic rule of filmmaking. It's called a 180-degree rule, and that's a nice guideline for you to stop adjusting your shutter speed and then switching to ISO speed, ramping. The last thing you want is have a shutter speed that is too long, causing the remote to trigger but the camera not acting, and thus you missing shots. You can actually miss half of the shots if you don't watch out. You won't have time to review it in time, and again, you'll end up with a irregular interval. So here you see me doing it again. I press stop, hit play, review the histogram, and hit start again, and if I have to, I can adjust the settings in the next interval. As a general guideline, I slowly let it go from 0 EV to -1 EV depending on the scene, but it takes a bit of practice and experience, I guess, to nail this every time. So the best advice I can give you is to go out and shoot and learn from your mistakes. Once you're done shooting, or once the exposure has settled and you're no longer adjusting your settings, you can let it run for say 10 to 20 more minutes till you have a nice little dark sequence at the end. Then you wrap up all the gear, head home, open up your computer, open up Lightroom and LRTimelapse, and let's get into the post-processing of this Holy Grail sequence. This is one of 4 methods that you can use to shoot a sunset. I've already covered some in the past. You can check out the tutorial playlist or the blog for the rest of them. So I have offloaded all the footage onto a hard drive. If you're wondering about this folder structure, you should check out my time-lapse data management and workflow video, which is also in the tutorial playlist. In Lightroom, I've put all the photos of the time-lapse in one single folder. Actually forgot to clean up the last photo, which was a long exposure, so that throws off the sequence, but that's not a big deal. We're gonna switch to LRTimelapse 5, which is a software that you can download via my affiliate link down below. I would really appreciate it if you can have a look at that. I take a small cut of the sale at no extra cost to you. Open up your LRTimelapse and scroll to the folder containing the raw files. You will let it run these previews, and at the end of it, you're going to hit the keyframe wizard button. This workflow has become so easy. I mentioned it earlier, the Holy Grail. It should be renamed to something else because it is no longer difficult to achieve. As you can see, the blue curve has been built, which is a visual representation of your exposure or the brightness or luminance of your photo. Those bumps you see in the graph is where we've adjusted the exposure. Hitting the keyframes wizard, you can set up a number of diamond keyframes, which is the number of photos that you'll be editing later in Lightroom. The next step is to press the Holy Grail wizard, and what you're going to try and do here is use those two sliders to get the beginning and the end of the sequence as close to the yellow line as possible. I'm simplifying the explanation here. Gunther, the developer of this software, has made a great, in-depth, really long tutorial of this software where you can find out more about the specifics and how it works, but we're keeping it as simple as possible today. So once you're happy with that curve, you're going to hit save, and then once the metadata is saved, we're going into Lightroom. As you can see, it recognizes that there's no metadata available, so you're going to select all the photos, right-click, go to metadata, and then read the metadata from the files. What it does now is it is looking through that little text file or XMP file that it's created containing the edit. It'll add the keyframes, and using this filter here, this preset filter, you'll end up with just the photos that you want to edit. So have a look at that. Go to your first photo, hit the Develop tab or press D on your keyboard and give it your desired edit. Now, make sure to not mess around too much with the clarity slider or some of the other sliders. It's best to keep these edits as basic as possible because some of them are non-linear effects which will impact the sequence and might induce extra flickering. Once you're happy with how that photo looks, press G or go back to Library, then select all your photos and use that little script icon to sync all keyframes. It is important to use this little button to sync all the keyframes and not just copy and paste the metadata. Go to the next photo and you can, for example, here start ramping your white balance, which you'll see me do over the next couple of photos. Once again, sync all the keyframes, let it run, and then open the next photo and edit it again. Repeat this process until you've hit the final photo. Once you're done, select all these photos, right-click metadata and save metadata to files, switch back to LRTimelapse and hit the reload button, which will read the new metadata. And then, as you can see, the images that we've edited, the yellow line is the exposure, and we added a bit of exposure on all the photos, and that's why that yellow line goes up a bit. That's the exposure value that you've adjusted. Then in the next step, if you hit auto transition, it will calculate for all the values that you have adjusted over the entire sequence. It will calculate the smooth transition, so that is called the ramping. So that's where the name comes from as well. It is level and ramp time-lapse. It used to be a Lightroom time-lapse, but that's another story. Now select the first photo and drag a square in the sky somewhere. This will be used to deflicker the sequence, and as soon as that is done with running, you'll see it has rebuilt the blue curve. Hit visual deflicker, and this is where your computer really starts working. Pretty much what's happening right now, it is generating previews based on the raw file, including the edit that you've done to it, and it's creating a small JPEG preview here in that frame on the left. You can see how long it'll take till it's finished, and you can see how many processes are running at the same time. This is really impressive coding and really impressive work by Gunther to make this preview possible. Click play and have a little preview to see what the sequence looks like, and then you can add additional deflickering using that visual deflicker button on the right. You can even select part of the sequence so you don't have to wait for the entire sequence to re-render once again. For some reason I ended up with a little bump here at the end, which I think is because I let the sequence run too dark and then pushed it a bit too much in the edit. This usually doesn't happen if you shoot it better than I did on this one. With the deflickering, you can add a smoothing curve, which is the green one. You can go pretty extreme with it. I just try and go for something that looks smooth enough, but not too smooth. You still want a natural gradient when it goes from day to night. There's a bunch of extra options there in case you need to push it even more, but the basic settings usually work quite well. Once again, it's calculating, and now it will rebuild the whole sequence, which we will let run. As you can see, that orange line is the deflicker line, and now your sequence should be smooth as. Now there's a number of ways that you can export this. You can use the built-in exporter from Lightroom and LRTimelapse, which is pretty much you go to Lightroom, select the sequence, and then go to File, Export, and navigate to the correct LRTimelapse preset. I, however, prefer using After Effects, so open up After Effects, import your folder containing the raw files and the metadata. After Effects will automatically recognize the metadata edits and apply it to the images. Create a composition using the image sequence, create a new composition using that existing composition. The reason we do this is so that you can set your export settings on the second comp, whereas if you want to do an edit on the master file, you can do that in the first comp, and then your second comp will still have all the right export settings. Once you're happy with what it all looks like, you can finalize your export settings. I like using the ProRes codec at full resolution and specify the output file path. let it render, and then have a look at what came out of this. Now, this whole process does not take too long. It used to take so much longer, but by far this is the best and most efficient way to shoot a Holy Grail time-lapse where you have the entire latitude and resolution of your photo sensor. There's, as I mentioned, multiple ways to shoot Holy Grail time-lapses. You can crossfade videos, you can use an external ramper, you can use an app to ramp for you, or an external hardware controller. There's the aperture priority method. I cover some of these in the tutorial playlist, and I'll be covering more of them in the near future. Now let's have a look at the output. So we've got the straight out of camera JPEG sequence, which has all the flickering in there because we didn't edit it. This is just straight out of camera. Then we have the smooth edited raw sequence processed through LRTimelapse. And then we have them side by side next to each other. As you can see, the results are quite remarkable, and I just can't believe how efficient this software has gotten. Again, if you're thinking about buying this software, please do me a favor and check it out via the link below. I make a small cut at no extra cost to you, and the more of these clicks I get, the more tutorials I can make for you all. I don't charge for these tutorials. What you can do as an extra though is check out my time-lapse cheat sheet on Patreon. Patreon is a website where you can support your favorite creators. The more funds you all give to me, the more videos I give you all, so isn't that just the best? If you have any questions, drop them down below. Do not forget to check out the blog where I've got the whole process written down step by step so you can follow it at your own pace. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you on the next video.